Zethkri pressed his six-fingered hand against the viewing port of the transport ship and watched the human space station grow larger before him. Omega-7 looked ordinary enough, a collection of metal cylinders and solar arrays spinning slowly around a central hub. Nothing about it suggested the beings inside were anything special. The Vorthak observer had seen dozens of species reach this point in their development, and humans seemed no different from any other young race seeking membership in the Galactic Federation. The docking procedure went smoothly, which surprised Zethkri slightly. Many new species struggled with the complex protocols, but the human controllers guided his ship in with practiced ease. When the airlock opened, he was greeted by a tall human male in a blue uniform. "Welcome aboard Omega-7, the human said, extending his hand in the strange human greeting ritual. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Station Commander." Zethkri studied the human carefully. Morrison appeared calm and confident, showing none of the nervous excitement most species displayed when meeting their first galactic representative. The human's eyes were steady, and his grip was firm but not aggressive when they shook hands. "I am Observer Zethkri of the Vorthak Collective," he replied in carefully practiced human English. "I come to evaluate your species for potential Federation membership." "Excellent," Morrison said, as if discussing the weather. "Dr. Grant is waiting to show you around. She's our xenobiologist and first contact specialist." They walked through corridors that hummed with activity. Humans moved past them with purpose, nodding respectfully to their commander but showing no particular interest in the alien visitor. This casual attitude puzzled Zethkri. In his experience, species either treated Federation representatives with overwhelming reverence or barely concealed hostility. These humans acted as if having an alien observer aboard was perfectly normal. Dr. Lisa Grant met them at the science section. She was smaller than Morrison, with brown hair tied back and intelligent green eyes that sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. "Observer Zethkri," she said warmly, "we're honored to have you here. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of human achievements and our application materials." "That will be acceptable," Zethkri replied, though he wondered why she seemed so enthusiastic. Most species approached Federation evaluation with anxiety. The tour began in the research laboratories, where humans worked on various projects ranging from advanced materials to quantum mechanics. Dr. Grant explained each area with obvious pride, but what struck Zethkri was how the researchers continued their work even with him watching. They answered his questions politely but without the desperate eagerness to impress that he usually encountered. "Your species achieved faster than light travel only 50 years ago," Zethkri observed as they moved through the engineering section. "This is remarkably recent." "True," Dr. Grant agreed. "But humans have always been quick learners when we need to be." Chief Engineer P. Collins, a stocky man with grease-stained coveralls, looked up from a console he was repairing. "Doc's being modest," he said with a grin. "We went from barely getting off our planet to crossing the galaxy in less than a century. Not bad for a bunch of apes, right?" The casual way Collins referred to his own species as apes amused Zethkri. Most species took themselves very seriously when presenting to the Federation. "Your technological development has been rapid," Zethkri acknowledged, "though many species achieve similar advancement curves." "Maybe," Collins shrugged, returning to his work, "but I bet none of them had as much fun doing it." As the day continued, Zethkri found himself increasingly puzzled by human behavior. They were clearly intelligent and capable, but they lacked the desperation or arrogance he expected. When he asked about their military capabilities, Captain Roy Bennett showed him the station's defensive systems with matter-of-fact professionalism. "We're not the biggest guns in the galaxy," Bennett admitted, "but we know how to use what we have." Dr. Grant took him to the communications center, where Dr. Amy Walsh was monitoring signals from across the sector. "We've been listening to Galactic traffic for decades," Walsh explained. "Learning languages, understanding politics, figuring out how everything works before we knocked on your door." "A wise approach," Zethkri said, though privately he wondered why they had bothered. Most species either demanded immediate recognition or cowered before Federation authority. That evening, Morrison invited him to the station's recreation area. Humans were relaxing after their shifts, playing games, sharing meals, and engaging in conversation. Children ran between the tables while adults laughed at jokes Zethkri didn't understand. The scene was so normal, so unremarkable that it bothered him. "Your people seem very relaxed about this evaluation," he commented to Morrison. The commander smiled. "Should we be worried? We've done our homework, followed the protocols, and we're good neighbors. If that's not enough for the Federation, then maybe the Federation isn't right for us." This casual confidence was unlike anything Zethkri had encountered. Species either begged for acceptance or threatened consequences if rejected. Humans simply presented themselves honestly and seemed prepared to accept whatever decision resulted. As he settled into his guest quarters that night, Zethkri reviewed his initial observations. Humans appeared to be a typical developing species with standard technology and social structures. They were neither particularly aggressive nor remarkably peaceful. Their achievements were solid but not extraordinary. By all measures, they seemed destined to become another unremarkable member species of the Federation, yet something nagged at him, something he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was their confidence or their casual attitude toward a process that determined their species' future. Whatever it was, Zethkri had the strange feeling that his evaluation of humanity was only just beginning, and that these seemingly ordinary beings might surprise him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The priority alert came during Zethkri's third day aboard Omega-7. He was observing Dr. Grant's xenobiology research when every communication panel on the station began flashing red. The harmonic tone that followed made his blood freeze in his veins before his translator could even process the message. "Dr. Amy." Walsh's voice came over the station-wide communication system. "Calm and professional despite delivering the most terrifying news in the galaxy? All personnel, we have received a Class Omega threat alert from the Galactic Early Warning Network. The Devourers have been detected in the Kepler 452 system and are moving toward our sector." Zethkri's legs nearly gave out beneath him. The Devourers. The name alone triggered evolutionary fear responses that went back millions of years across dozens of species. He had never seen one, but every child in the galaxy knew the stories. Ancient creatures from the void between galaxies, each one the size of a moon, consuming entire star systems and converting the matter into more of themselves. "Observer, are you all right?" Dr. Grant asked, noticing his distress. Zethkri struggled to find words. How could he explain the primal terror that every advanced species felt when facing the ultimate predator? "The Devourers," he managed. "Your people do not understand. They are extinction itself. No species has ever fought them and survived." 2. His amazement, Dr. Grant simply nodded. "We've heard the stories. Jake's calling a staff meeting in 10 minutes. You're welcome to attend." Zethkri followed her through corridors where humans continued their duties as if nothing had changed. A few looked concerned, but none showed the paralyzing fear that should have gripped any intelligent being upon hearing that news. Perhaps they truly didn't understand the magnitude of the threat. The briefing room filled quickly with department heads and senior staff. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood at the front, his expression serious but not panicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've all heard the alert. Let me give you the details." Morrison activated the holographic display, showing stellar charts with red markers indicating Devourer movement. 3 entities detected moving at sublight speeds toward our sector. At current velocity, they'll reach the outer system in approximately 72 hours. Chief Engineer Pete Collins raised his hand. "Any word on evacuation procedures?" "The Galactic Council has issued sector-wide evacuation orders," Morrison replied. "All non-essential personnel and civilians are to withdraw to safe zones immediately." "And essential personnel?" Captain Bennett asked. Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. "That's what we need to discuss." Zethkri watched in growing confusion as the humans calmly analyzed threat data that should have sent them fleeing in terror. Navigator Susan Hill, who couldn't have been older than 25 human years, studied the movement patterns with academic interest. "They're not moving in a straight line," she observed. "There's a pattern to their course corrections." "Hunting behavior," Dr. Grant agreed. They're following energy signatures, probably looking for high-population worlds. The casual way they discussed the Devourers as if they were merely dangerous animals rather than forces of cosmic destruction disturbed Zethkri deeply. He cleared his throat. Forgive me, but I must speak. You do not comprehend what approaches. The Devourers are not merely large predators, they are annihilation incarnate. In 3 million years of recorded galactic history, no weapon has ever harmed them, no defense has ever slowed them. Species that encounter them have two choices, flee or die. The room fell quiet, and for a moment Zethkri thought his words had finally conveyed the proper fear. Then Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Think. You for the historical context, observer. That information helps us understand what we're facing. He turned back to his staff. Dr. Walsh, what's our communication status with the fleet? Full contact with all 12 ships, Walsh replied. Admiral Rodriguez is requesting updated tactical assessments. 12 ships. Zethkri's translator must have malfunctioned. Did you say 12 ships? That's our entire defense fleet for this sector, Bennett confirmed. Not much, but they're good ships with experienced crews. The Vorthak observer stared at them in disbelief. You intend to fight? With 12 ships? That's the idea, Morrison said simply. Zethkri's voice rose higher than he intended. This is madness. The Devourers cannot be fought. They consume stars themselves. Your weapons cannot even scratch their hull material. Maybe not, Collins said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. But we won't know until we try, will we? The evacuation order applies to your station as well, Zethkri insisted desperately, trying to make them understand. You should be preparing to flee, not planning to fight. Dr. Grant leaned forward. Observer, can I ask you something? In all your species' history, has running away from a problem ever made that problem go away? The question caught Zethkri off guard. I do not understand the relevance. It's simple, she continued. If we run now, the Devourers will just follow us later. They'll keep consuming systems, growing stronger, until eventually there's nowhere left to run. Every species that evacuates today will face them again tomorrow. But that is how survival works, Zethkri protested. You flee from superior predators. You preserve your species. You do not throw your lives away in hopeless battles. Morrison stood up. I appreciate your concern, observer, but humanity has never been very good at running away from fights. Even hopeless ones. He looked around the room. Anyone who wants to evacuate with the civilian transports is free to go. No judgment, no questions asked. This isn't anyone's fight but ours. Not a single person moved. All right then, Morrison continued. Pete, I need you to work with Dr. Lee on those weapon modifications we discussed. Roy, coordinate with Fleet Command on defensive positions. Susan, plot evacuation routes for non-combatants who might still be in the system. As the meeting broke up and humans hurried to their assignments, Zethkri remained seated, struggling to process what he had witnessed. These beings had just calmly decided to fight creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. They showed concern? Yes, but not the overwhelming fear that should have paralyzed any rational species. Dr. Grant approached him as the room emptied. I know this must seem crazy to you. It is beyond crazy, Zethkri replied. It is suicide, she smiled sadly. Maybe, but you know what the real tragedy would be? If we ran away without even trying to fight back. If we just accepted that some things are too big or too scary to oppose, she paused. Humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We might not win. Observer, but we're going to do something. As she left to join the preparations, Zethkri sat alone in the briefing room, staring at the tactical displays showing the approaching doom. For the first time in his long life, he began to wonder if perhaps his understanding of courage and wisdom might be incomplete. These humans were either the bravest beings in the galaxy or the most foolish, and he was no longer certain there was a difference between the two. Zethkri found himself in the station's main laboratory, surrounded by humans, who treated the approaching apocalypse as if it were merely another research problem to solve. Dr. Grant stood before a massive holographic display showing everything the galaxy knew about the Devourers, while her team took notes and asked questions that would have been unthinkable to any other species. "Observer," Dr. Grant said, gesturing to an empty chair, "we could use your help understanding these creatures better." Zethkri approached reluctantly. Speaking about the Devourers in detail went against every instinct his species possessed. But these humans seemed determined to gather information regardless of how terrifying it might be. "What you must understand," he began carefully, "is that the Devourers are not like other life forms. They are older than most civilizations, perhaps. Older than many stars themselves. Each one is a living ship, if such a term can apply to something so vast." Dr. Amy Walsh looked up from her datapad. "How large exactly?" The question made Zethkri's skin crawl. The smallest recorded Devourer measured 800 kilometers in diameter. The largest was twice that size. They are spherical, with surfaces that appear to be both organic and metallic simultaneously. Chief Engineer Collins whistled low. "That's bigger than most moons." "Much bigger," Zethkri confirmed. "And their mass is far greater than their size suggests. They create gravitational distortions that can pull asteroids into their path from thousands of kilometers away." Dr. Grant leaned forward with the kind of scientific curiosity that would have horrified most galactic citizens. "What do they consume exactly?" Zethkri hesitated. Even describing their feeding process felt dangerous, as if speaking the words might somehow attract their attention. "Everything: organic matter, metals, gases, energy itself. They break down matter at the molecular level and incorporate it into their own structure. A devourer that consumes a planet becomes larger and more powerful, so they grow by eating," Navigator Susan Hill observed. "Like any other organism." The casual way she reduced cosmic horrors to basic biology startled Zethkri. "They are not mere organisms, they are forces of entropy given form. When a devourer encounters a populated world, it does not simply destroy it. It unmakes it, erasing every trace that life ever existed there." "But they must have some kind of weakness," Captain Bennett said. "Everything does." Zethkri shook his head vigorously. "No species has ever discovered any vulnerability." The Zephyrian Empire threw 10,000 warships at a single devourer 3 million years ago. Every ship was consumed, and the devourer grew larger from the meal. The crystalline minds tried to reason with them, believing all intelligence could be reached through logic. The devourers consumed their homeworld while they were still trying to establish communication. The humans listened to these accounts of galactic-scale disasters with intense focus, but not the paralyzing dread that should have accompanied such knowledge. Instead, they asked more questions. "How do they move?" Dr. Grant inquired. "No one knows," Zethkri admitted. "They travel slower than light between star systems, but once they enter a system, they can appear anywhere instantly. Some theorists believe they manipulate space-time itself." "Do they work together or independently?" Morrison asked. "Both. Sometimes a single devourer will consume an entire system alone. Other times, multiple entities coordinate their attacks to surround and trap fleeing populations. The pattern seems random, which makes them even more terrifying." Dr. Walsh tapped her stylus against her datapad. "What about their psychological impact? You mentioned evolutionary fear responses." Zethkri felt his hands trembling as he considered the question. "Every intelligent species in the galaxy carries genetic memories of the devourers, even those who have never encountered them directly. They represent the ultimate predator, the final fear that has shaped evolution across millions of worlds. When sentient beings see a devourer, their minds often break from the sheer impossibility of what they are witnessing." "But you're functioning fine right now," Collins pointed out. "Because they are not here yet," Zethkri replied. "When they arrive, when you see them with your own eyes, you will understand. The fear is not rational. It bypasses conscious thought and strikes directly at the most primitive parts of the brain. Trained warriors have been known to collapse into catatonic states simply from viewing devourer images." Dr. Grant turned to Morrison. Jake, we need to prepare the crew for psychological warfare as much as physical combat. Morrison nodded. Roy, add psychological conditioning to the combat preparation schedule. Zethkri stared at them in amazement. You still intend to fight them, even knowing all of this? Especially knowing all of this, Dr. Grant replied. Information is the first step to finding a solution. There is no solution, Zethkri insisted. That is what I am trying to tell you. The greatest minds in galactic history have studied the Devourers for millions of years. Civilizations that mastered technologies your species cannot imagine have tried and failed to harm them. What makes you think 12 human ships can accomplish what entire interstellar empires could not? Morrison stood up and walked to the display showing the approaching Devourers. Maybe we can't. Maybe this is completely hopeless and we're all going to die. But here's the thing, Observer. We've been in hopeless situations before. Not like this, Zethkri protested. Maybe not exactly like this, Morrison agreed. But humans have a long history of facing impossible odds. We've fought diseases that killed millions, survived natural disasters that should have wiped us out, and overcome enemies that seemed unbeatable. Sometimes we lost, sometimes we won, but we always fought. Collins chuckled. Besides, we've got one advantage that all those other species didn't have. What possible advantage could you possess? Zethkri asked. We're too stupid to know when we're beaten, Collins replied with a grin that somehow managed to be both terrifying and reassuring. As the meeting continued, Zethkri watched the humans plan their impossible battle with growing fascination and horror. They discussed tactics against creatures that had never been successfully fought. They analyzed weaknesses that no one had ever discovered. They prepared for a war that every rational being knew could not be won, yet something in their determination reminded him of ancient stories from his own species' distant past, tales of heroes who faced the darkness not because they believed they could win, but because someone had to try. He had always assumed those stories were myths, inspiring fiction designed to teach moral lessons to children. For the first time, Zethkri began to wonder if perhaps those ancient heroes had been more like humans than his modern, civilized species cared to admit. The thought disturbed him more than anything else he had learned about the approaching Devourers. The evacuation had begun across the sector, and Zethkri watched from Omega-7's observation deck as ship after ship fled the approaching darkness. Vorthek vessels streaked past, their elegant hulls gleaming as they carried his people to safety. Crystalline mine ships floated by like geometric flowers, their occupants no doubt calculating the mathematical probability of survival. The hegemony's massive transports lumbered through space, loaded with entire populations abandoning their homes. 37 different species were running away, following the same pattern that had kept them alive for millions of years. Only the humans remained. Commander Tony Rodriguez's fleet had arrived from the outer colonies, 12 ships that looked impossibly small against the vastness of space. Zethkri could see them through the viewport, arranged in what the humans called a defensive formation, though he couldn't understand how 12 vessels could defend anything against the approaching horror. It's quite a sight, isn't it? Lieutenant Commander Morrison joined him at the observation window. It is madness, Zethkri replied, though he found himself unable to look away from the human fleet. Commander Rodriguez has brought children to fight gods. Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching his species' small fleet prepare for the impossible. Tony's ships aren't the newest or the biggest, but they've got experienced crews. Men and women who faced pirates, raiders, and hostile aliens. They know what they're getting into. They cannot know, Zethkri insisted. No one can understand what approaches until they see it with their own eyes. Maybe not, Morrison agreed, but they're here anyway. Through the station's communication system came the voice of Commander Rodriguez, calm and professional as he coordinated with his captains. Falcon Wing, take position at Grid 77. Phoenix Squadron, establish overlapping fields of fire at Grid 12-4. Remember, people, we're not trying to win a conventional engagement here. Dr. Karen Lee's voice joined the tactical discussion from the station's weapons laboratory. Commander, we've finished modifications on 40% of your torpedo payloads. The quantum resonance warheads are untested, but theoretical models suggest they might disrupt devourer biosignatures. Might being the key word, Rodriguez replied with what sounded like grim humor. Any disruption is better than nothing, Doctor. Zethkri turned away from the viewport, unable to watch the preparations any longer. This is exactly what my people feared when we first encountered humans. Your species possesses a fundamental flaw that will eventually destroy you. What flaw is that? Morrison asked. You do not know when to surrender, Morrison smiled sadly. You're right. We're terrible at giving up. They walked through the station corridors, passing humans who worked with quiet efficiency despite the approaching doom. Children had been evacuated with the civilian transports, but adult volunteers remained to support the fleet's operations. Engineers fine-tuned weapon systems that had never been designed to fight devourers. Medical staff prepared for casualties that would likely never need treatment because there would be no survivors. In the main briefing room, the senior staff was reviewing final battle plans. Dr. Grant looked up as they entered, her face showing strain but no fear. Observer, we were hoping you might review our tactical assessment, she said. Your historical knowledge could help us avoid mistakes other species have made. Zethkri stared at the battle plan displayed on the holographic projector. It was actually quite sophisticated, showing how the human fleet would use the gas giant's gravity well and asteroid field to their advantage. They had studied every recorded encounter with devourers and identified patterns that might be exploitable. This is all useless, he said finally. Do you not understand? There are no tactics against the devourers. They are not ships to be outmaneuvered, or armies to be outflanked. They are forces of nature. You might as well try to develop battle plans against a hurricane or a supernova. Captain Bennett leaned back in his chair. But hurricanes can be predicted and prepared for. Supernovas give off warning signs before they explode. Everything in the universe follows some kind of pattern, even if we don't understand it yet. The devourers follow no patterns that benefit other species, Zethkri replied. They are chaos incarnate. Maybe, Dr. Grant said quietly. But chaos theory suggests that even apparently random systems have underlying order. If we can find that order, we might find something we can exploit. Navigator Hill pulled up stellar charts showing devourer movement patterns over the past million years. Look at this data, Observer. There are patterns here, subtle ones, but they exist. The devourers don't move completely randomly. They follow energy gradients, population densities, and resource concentrations. So what? Zethkri demanded. Knowing how a predator hunts does not make you capable of fighting it. Chief Engineer Collins spoke up from where he was reviewing power distribution charts. Actually, it does. Back on Earth, humans used to hunt animals much larger and stronger than ourselves. Mammoths, bears, big cats that could kill us with a single swipe. But we learned their patterns, figured out their weaknesses, and developed tools that let us win anyway. The devourers are not animals, Zethkri protested. Everything's an animal if you look at it the right way, Collins replied with disturbing confidence. The discussion continued, with humans calmly analyzing the approaching apocalypse as if it were merely another problem to solve. They talked about energy signatures and bioresonance frequencies, about gravitational manipulation and quantum field disruption. They discussed backup plans and contingency operations for scenarios that no sane being would even consider. Finally, Zethkri could take no more. Why? He demanded, his voice cracking with emotion he didn't know he possessed. Why are you doing this? You could evacuate. You could live. Your species could survive to see another day. Why throw everything away for a battle that cannot be? Juan? The room fell silent. Morrison looked around at his staff, seeing something in their faces that Zethkri couldn't interpret. Observer, Morrison said finally, let me tell you about a battle that happened on Earth about 300 years ago. A small group of human soldiers were defending a position against overwhelming enemy forces. They were outnumbered 50 To one completely surrounded with no hope of rescue or reinforcement. What happened to them? Zethkri asked, though he suspected he already knew. They all died, Morrison replied simply. Every last one. But they held their position long enough for civilians to escape. They bought time with their lives, and because of their sacrifice, thousands of innocent people survived. That is exactly my point, Zethkri said. They died for nothing. No, Dr. Grant interrupted. They died for something more important than their own lives. They died so others could live. She stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet. Maybe we can't win this fight. Maybe we're all going to die just like those soldiers. But if we can slow the Devourers down, if we can hurt them even a little bit, maybe the next species they encounter will have a better chance. And if we somehow manage to drive them off, Morrison added, then every world in this galaxy will be safer because someone finally stood up and said no. Zethkri stared at them, finally understanding something that terrified him more than the approaching Devourers. These humans weren't fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because they believed some things were worth dying for, and that belief made them more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. They came out of the darkness between stars like nightmares given form. Zethkri felt them before he saw them, a wrongness that pressed against his mind and made his vision blur. The station's sensors detected them first, massive gravitational anomalies that bent space around them as they approached the gas giant where Omega-7 waited. Contact, Navigator Hill announced, her voice steady despite what her instruments were showing. 3 entities bearing 27 Mark IV distance, approximately 1 million kilometers enclosing. Zethkri forced himself to look at the main display and immediately regretted it. The Devourers appeared as dark spheres against the starfield, their surfaces seeming to absorb light itself. They were impossibly large, each one easily the size of Earth's moon, moving through space with a grace that defied their massive bulk. The evolutionary terror hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave way, and he collapsed into the nearest chair, every instinct screaming at him to flee, to hide, to do anything except remain in the presence of these cosmic predators. Around him, he could hear the station's system struggling to maintain function as electromagnetic interference from the Devourers disrupted sensitive equipment. Gravitational distortions increasing, Chief Engineer Collins reported, his voice slightly strained but remarkably calm. Hull stress is within acceptable parameters, but we're going to feel some turbulence. Lieutenant Commander Morrison activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Omega-7 actual. Targets are confirmed and approaching. Execute Battle Plan Alpha on my mark. Zethkri watched in amazement as the humans continued their duties despite the overwhelming presence of the Devourers. Dr. Grant monitored sensor readings with scientific fascination rather than terror. Captain Bennett coordinated defensive systems as if this were a routine military exercise. Even young Navigator Hill kept her hands steady on her controls while her readings showed creatures that should have driven her insane with fear. How are you functioning? Zethkri gasped, struggling to speak through the waves of primal dread washing over him. Can you not feel them? Dr. Grant looked up from her sensor station, and for the first time Zethkri noticed the slight tremor in her hands. The pale color of her skin, the way her breathing had become shallow and rapid. Oh, we feel them, she said quietly. Trust me, we feel them. That's when Zethkri realized the truth. The humans were afraid, terrified, in fact. Their elevated heart rates, stress hormones, and micro-expressions all screamed of barely controlled panic. But somehow, impossibly, they continued working through that fear. Fleet positions confirmed. Commander Rodriguez's voice came through the communication system. Beginning attack run. On the tactical display, Zethkri watched 12 tiny dots representing human ships move toward 3 massive spheres that dwarfed them beyond all comprehension. It was like watching insects attack elephants. Except the elephants were continent-sized and capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. Weapons range in 30 seconds, Rodriguez announced. All ships target the lead entity. Concentrate fire on grid coordinates 77 Alpha. The first human torpedo strikes hit the lead Devourer and simply vanished, consumed by the creature's impossible hull without leaving so much as a scorch mark. Secondary strikes followed, quantum resonance warheads that Dr. Lee had modified to disrupt biosignatures, but they too disappeared into the Devourer's mass. No visible damage to primary target, reported the weapons officer aboard Rodriguez's flagship. All conventional ordnance ineffective. Zethkri wanted to scream at them, to run, to flee before the Devourers noticed their pathetic attacks, but the words wouldn't come. The terror was too great, too overwhelming. He could only watch as the human fleet continued their impossible assault. Then something changed. The lead Devourer, which had been ignoring the human attacks like a whale ignoring gnats, suddenly shifted its movement pattern. Instead of continuing toward the populated inner system, it turned to face the human fleet directly. "We've got its attention," Rodriguez observed with what might have been satisfaction. "All ships, execute evasive pattern Delta. Don't let it lock onto you." What followed was unlike any space battle in galactic history. The humans used every advantage their smaller size afforded them, darting between asteroids and using the gas giant's gravity well to slingshot around the massive Devourers. They coordinated with precision that would have been admirable under normal circumstances, but seemed miraculous given the psychological pressure they were operating under. Zethkri watched Morrison coordinate the station's defenses, his face pale with sweat, but his voice never wavering as he issued orders. "Collins, reroute power from non-essential systems to the primary batteries. Grant, keep monitoring their biosignatures for any changes. Hill, plot escape vectors for the civilian transports still in the outer system." "Jake," Dr. Grant called, out suddenly, her voice tight with excitement rather than fear. "I'm reading fluctuations in the lead entity's energy signature. Something in our quantum resonance attacks is having an effect?" Morrison turned to the tactical display where the lead Devourer was indeed behaving differently. Its movement patterns had become erratic, and strange energy discharges flickered across its surface. "Rodriguez, did you copy that?" Morrison asked. "Confirmed. Omega 7, we're seeing the same readings. Whatever Doc Lee cooked up is actually working." For the first time since the battle began, Zethkri felt something other than paralyzing terror. Hope, perhaps, or simple amazement that the impossible might actually be happening. The human fleet pressed their attack, focusing their modified weapons on the lead Devourer while the other two entities moved to flank them. It should have been a massacre, but the humans' tactics kept them alive. They used the asteroid field like a three-dimensional maze, appearing from unexpected angles to deliver strikes before vanishing again into the debris. "Direct hit on Target 2, reported one of the fleet captains. "Confirmed energy signature. Disruption. Target 3 is changing course," Hill announced from her navigation station. "It's moving away from the inner system." Zethkri stared at the tactical display in disbelief. One of the Devourers was actually retreating. Not destroyed, but visibly damaged and choosing to withdraw rather than continue the engagement. In 3 million years of galactic history, no species had ever forced a Devourer to retreat. The battle continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The damaged lead Devourer began to exhibit more erratic behavior, its biosignature fluctuating wildly as the human quantum weapons disrupted whatever processes kept it functioning. Finally, it too began to withdraw, limping away from the human fleet with visible energy discharges crackling along its hull. The third Devourer, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, followed its companions into the outer darkness. As the immediate threat receded, Zethkri found his paralytic fear slowly ebbing, replaced by a stunned amazement that bordered on the surreal. The humans had done the impossible. They had faced the ultimate predators of the galaxy and not only survived, but driven them away. Morrison slumped into his command chair, his face gray with exhaustion, but showing the first genuine smile Zethkri had seen since the battle began. "All stations, damage report. Minor hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, Collins replied. "Nothing we can't handle. Fleet status, Commander?" Morrison asked. Rodriguez's voice came through with obvious relief. We lost the Intrepid and the Valiant, but the rest of the fleet is operational. Whatever those things were, they weren't. Expecting a fight? As the reports continued, Zethkri realized that he had just witnessed something that would change the galaxy forever. Not just because the Devourers had been fought successfully, but because he had seen the true nature of human courage. In the hours following the battle, Zethkri wandered through Omega-7's corridors like a being reborn. Everything looked the same as it had before the Devourers arrived, but his perception of it had fundamentally changed. The humans around him continued their duties with the same casual efficiency they had shown throughout his visit, but now he understood what lay beneath that surface calm. He found Lieutenant Commander Morrison in the station's observation lounge, staring out at the debris field where the battle had been fought. The human sat alone, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had grown cold, while he watched salvage teams recover what remained of the 2 ships they had lost. "Commander," Zethkri said softly, approaching the table where Morrison sat. Morrison looked up, and for the first time since they had met, Zethkri saw the human without his professional mask. The man's eyes were haunted, his face drawn with exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. This was not the confident leader who had welcomed a Federation observer, or the calm commander who had coordinated an impossible battle. This was simply a man dealing with the cost of victory. "Observer," Morrison replied, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, sit." Zethkri settled into the chair, studying the human's face carefully. "You were afraid," he said, not asking a question, but stating a realization. Morrison nodded slowly. "Terrified. From the moment those things appeared on our sensors until they disappeared into the dark, I was more afraid than I've ever been in my life. But you fought anyway." "Yes. Why?" Morrison was quiet for a long time, staring out at the stars where the Devourers had vanished. "Because being afraid was exactly why we had to fight," he said finally. "Fear tells you when something is truly dangerous, when the stakes are as high as they can possibly be. If we had run away from that fear, if we had let it paralyze us the way it paralyzed other species, then we would have deserved whatever happened to us." Zethkri considered this carefully. "In my species' philosophy, fear is a warning system designed to preserve life. To ignore it is considered a form of mental illness." "Maybe it is," Morrison admitted, "but sometimes mental illness and courage look pretty similar from the outside." Dr. Grant entered the lounge, looking as exhausted as her commander. She carried a datapad filled with preliminary battle analysis, but she set it aside when she saw the 2 of them talking. "How are our guests from the evacuated ships adjusting?" Morrison asked. "As well as can be expected," Grant replied. "Most of them are still in shock that anyone fought the Devourers at all, let alone drove them off." She looked at Zethkri. "Your people have been asking a lot of questions about human psychology." "They are trying to understand what they witnessed," Zethkri said. "As am I." Morrison leaned forward. "What don't you understand, observer?" "Everything," Zethkri replied. "Honestly, your species should not have been able to function in the presence of the Devourers. The fear response they trigger is evolutionary, built into the deepest levels of consciousness. Yet you not only functioned, you fought effectively." "We were afraid," Dr. Grant said quietly. "Don't mistake what you saw for fearlessness. Every person on this station, every crew member in the fleet, was experiencing the same terror that paralyzed you. Our heart rates were elevated, our stress hormones were through the roof, our hands were shaking." "Then how did you continue to work?" Zethkri asked. Morrison and Grant exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding. "Because fear isn't the opposite of courage," Morrison said. "Fear is the raw material that courage is made from. Anyone can be brave when they're not afraid. The real test comes when you're so terrified you can barely think, and you choose to do the right thing anyway." Zethkri felt something shift in his understanding, like a fundamental constant of the universe quietly changing value. "You knew? You were afraid?" "Of course we knew," Grant replied. "We acknowledged it, accepted it, and then decided it didn't matter. The Devourers had to be stopped, and we were the only ones here to try. Our fear was irrelevant compared to that responsibility. But the logical response to such overwhelming fear is paralysis or flight, Zethkri protested. Every species in the galaxy has evolved the same response pattern. Morrison stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the fleet formation, where Commander Rodriguez's ships maintained their defensive positions. Maybe that's why every other species has spent 3 million years running from the devourers instead of fighting them. The implications of that statement hit Zethkri like a physical blow. His species, like all the others in the Federation, had developed sophisticated civilizations precisely because they knew when to retreat from superior threats. That wisdom had kept them alive long enough to reach the stars, to build vast interstellar societies, to accumulate the knowledge and technology. That made their comfortable lives possible, but it had also made them incapable of standing up to ultimate predators. You are saying that our survival instincts, the very traits that allowed us to become spacefaring civilizations, are also our greatest weakness, he said slowly. I'm not saying it's a weakness, Grant replied. It served your species well, but every survival strategy has costs. Your species learned to survive by avoiding unwinnable fights. Humanity learned to survive by fighting unwinnable fights and occasionally winning them anyway. Over the following days, as Zethkri prepared his report for the Galactic Federation, he struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in his language. How did one explain to the galaxy's most advanced civilizations that their greatest strength was also a limitation? How did one describe a species that functioned normally while experiencing paralyzing terror? His final report was unlike anything ever submitted to the Federation Council. Instead of the usual dry analysis of technological capabilities and social structures, Zethkri found himself writing what amounted to a philosophical treatise on the nature of courage. The humans possess a unique psychological trait that allows them to function effectively while experiencing extreme fear. He wrote, "This is not fearlessness, but rather the ability to acknowledge fear and choose to act despite it. This trait appears to be universal among their species and may represent an evolutionary adaptation to their world's harsh conditions." He paused in his writing, remembering Morrison's words about courage being made from fear. Recommendation: immediate acceptance of humanity into the Galactic Federation with full membership privileges. Furthermore, I suggest that human defensive tactics be studied and adopted by all member species. The Devourers have been a galactic threat for millions of years because no species has ever possessed the psychological capacity to fight them effectively. Humanity has demonstrated that these creatures can be opposed, damaged, and driven away. He finished the report with words that would echo through Federation halls for generations to come. I have witnessed true fear, and I have seen what lies beyond it. The humans call it courage, but I believe it may be something more fundamental, the refusal to let fear make their choices for them. In a galaxy that has spent eons fleeing from its monsters, perhaps it is time we learned from the species that chooses to face them instead. 6 months later, human defensive techniques were being taught at military academies across the galaxy. The Devourers, having encountered resistance for the first time in their existence, began avoiding systems under human protection, and Zethkri served as the Federation's ambassador to humanity, forever changed by the day he stood with humans and learned the difference between being fearless and being brave.